what happens the morning after when, when you lost the rent money and the school tuition money, although, if like I know right about now, the one you really don't want to lose is that child support check. Because unlike everybody else, they don't play. But anyway, we'll get started in just a moment. And I appreciate all the people who have been coming. At the risk of seeming as we get warmed up here, for all the people who have actually been to every hearing, if you raise your hand. Okay, we're going to take that again, because you know what, the number is small enough where we might actually try to. I got to check before I say this, but we might try to find a gift or something that we can give the people who have attended all of the hearings. Let me say as well, on the as an announcement, on the 22nd of March, we're going to have a bill hearing. We've got a couple of bills up, but what we're working on is a kind of summary of all of the hearings that we've had, and we'll include this one in it as well. So what we wanted to try to do, and for those of you who have been to every hearing, we've attempted to take the issue of internet gaming and slice it by the different subject areas that seem to be contentious. So we've talked about, for example, we've had, I thought, a thorough discussion just about sovereignty and exclusivity. We had a discussion about hubs and games. We had a discussion about the eligibilities and the different ways in which you could entertain the game, those kinds of discussions. We've discussed UEJA, we discussed IGRA, we've discussed the Wire Act, we've discussed the ban on betting on sports. I think we've covered a lot of the different issues. So if nothing else, you ought to get a certificate in internet gaming and the like, because we were trying to be informative as much as we could. And I want to commend all the people who have participated in the hearings. I see Haig, who comes from my neck of the woods in Los Angeles County. But again, the interest is appreciated. I'm sure all of you are aware that the New Jersey bill was vetoed by Governor Christie. Doesn't have any particular bearing on what we do, but that bill was vetoed. Their circumstances were different than ours, and it was a different bill in that it spoke to expansion of their casino business in all aspects of the casino business. So it wasn't quite what we're attempting to do here. I'm going to give a couple of minutes. I know there were some people who were trying to come. I'm going to ask if Ms. Canali, now, did I pronounce that correctly? Okay, because see, I'm used to seeing it with an I on the end and in a suit label, but Canali actually makes a very good suit. But I don't know if you've ever seen the Canali anyway. But if Ms. Canali, Reverend Butler, and Mr. Jones, if you guys would take a seat here at the table, we'll be cranking up in just a second. And let me again thank all of you for coming. And I bet I'm the first person who's ever associated your Canali with the one with the I on the end too, huh?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I think so. I think so.
No. If they actually have a store on Wilshire, just west of Rodeo Drive. It's Canali makes a very good suit. If you wanted to make some,
you know that, sir.
Yeah, you want to make someone happy, get them a Canali gift certificate. But they're right. Yeah, they're right there they're right around the corner from the Xenia store, and couple of other people, so if you happen to be in the area there. I want to get started because I want to certainly respect the time of the people. The other people who come will fill them in. So I'm going to call us to order again. This will be the last of our hearings on internet gaming. It has not been our intention to necessarily discuss the particulars of the bill, but this was really more educational. I know that many of my members have been, I said that as one came in, I know that many of my members have been watching from their offices as we're broadcast, and the idea of this proceeding was to provide education to people about internet gaming and the likes thereof. I mentioned earlier we've covered a number of the subject area. Today what we're looking at is the socioeconomic impacts of internet gaming and what its impact could be on California. And I mention that because, again, obviously in public comment, if somebody has something that we've already taken up and you want to go back, but we try to keep the hearings on the subject that we're talking about at one time, which is why we set up a series of hearings that were issue specific. This one is no less important than the others. It just happens to be the one that we're doing at the end. So with that, let me thank the panelists for coming. And Terry Sue, we have you up first. Although I like Miss Canali. I'll tell you, Canali, I've got some Canalis. They're
Did someone skip lunch today, Senator?
No, we're not cannolis. That's something
Not cannolis. Now, I have got the cannoli several times, not the suit cannoli.
But for the record, a cannoli suit with an I on the end, not the two ends and the thing he's talking about, the pasta. But a cannoli is a very well-made Italian fabric maker. They're about 150 years old, and they make good stuff. So Miss Canali, which is her name, although it has an E on the end, is with the Office of Problem Gambling, and thank you for coming, and you're up.
Absolutely. Well, my family comes from Italy as well, and it's also very ironic, even though that this is the last of all of the hearings. I attended all but one, and I listened on the internet. I was very dedicated at home that day. It's Problem Gambling Awareness Week this week, so very appropriate that we're here while California... Art knew that, I know, because Art and I were, yeah, exactly. So we joined many other states in creating awareness this week for the signs and symptoms of problem gambling. Thank you, Senator Wright, for inviting me, committee members, and staff. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what the Office of Problem Gambling does and the services that we offer to those who are addicted to gambling. Our mission is to provide quality, research-driven leadership in prevention, intervention, and treatment for problem and pathological gamblers and their families. So not just the actual gambler, but those who are negatively affected by problem gambling. We administer several prevention program strategies, including public awareness campaigns like Problem Gambling Awareness Week, toll-free helplines like the 1-800-GAMBLER number, and treatment for problem and pathological gamblers as well. We also have empirically driven research to ensure that we're administering our programs in a harm reduction way. So we want to make sure that we're reducing the harm and not increasing more harm. And we use UCLA Gambling Studies program to help us research those things. This week, during Problem Gambling Awareness Week, we actually launched the final component of the California Problem Gambling Treatment Services program. So in 08-09, we were allocated funding to start treatment services, and for the first time, treatment is now offered throughout the state of California to problem gamblers and those negatively affected by the problem gambling behavior. Office of Problem Gambling has built a multimodal stepped care system using telephone counseling, outpatient services, intensive outpatient services, and even residential care. Over the past 3 years, 14 people per day call the 1-800-GAMBLER helpline for assistance every day. Since 2003, when the Office of Problem Gambling was legislatively established, calls to the 1-800-GAMBLER helpline have increased by 73%. So some of our awareness is working. In 2010, 4,751 people called the 1-800-GAMBLER helpline for help. Of those, about 2.7%, or 128 people, indicated that their gambling preference was the internet. So even though we know that internet gambling is technically illegal in California, 128 people still called for help who their first preference was internet. If internet gambling were legalized, studies suggest that there may be an increase in the number of those who need treatment for problem gambling. The California Code of Regulations, Commission Regulations, in Division 18, Chapter 7, Article 6, already provides a model responsible gambling program. So there's the problem gambling side, but then with the industry, there are responsible gambling programs. So the card rooms have to post information related to the signs and symptoms of problem and pathological gambling. They have to display the toll-free helpline number that's approved by the Office of Problem Gambling, which is 1-800-GAMBLER. They have to post the Office of Problem Gambling website, which is www.problemgambling.ca.gov. And I brought some little postcards and I set them outside that kind of tells what kind of information you can find on our website. They require responsible gambling messages on all advertising, so you might hear the play responsible call 1-800-GAMBLER. And they also require the card rooms to train their employees annually about the signs and symptoms of problem gambling. Lastly, they're required to develop policies and procedures to administer a self-exclusion program. So right there is already in the laws a responsible gambling program. Since July 2007, when card rooms were required to develop responsible gambling programs, 1,342 patrons have participated in the statewide self-exclusion program administered by the Department of Justice Bureau of Gambling Control. And as of March 2nd, 2011, 1,029 people remain actively enrolled in that program. That's all for my presentation. Again, I thank you, and I appreciate the time to be here and would answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you. What we'll do is go through and come back. I've got a couple of questions, and I'll come back and get them. Let me go to Mr. Jones, or who? You know what, Reverend, you want to?
Yeah, if that's all right.
Not a problem.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator, for the opportunity to consider the socioeconomic impacts of gambling and the internet gambling specifically. I'm sorry that more presenters could not have joined us today. Unfortunately, many did not have the opportunity to rearrange their schedules and join us. I did have the opportunity to speak with some, Dr. Fong of UCLA, Kent Wu of the Chinese Community Task Force on Gambling in the San Francisco area, Dr. Cooler of the Friday Night Partnership, who has a gambling preventative program for youth titled Betting on Our Future, Tom Tucker of the Compulsive Gambling Institute. Others I was only able to contact their offices, and the ones I spoke with appreciated the work being done and regretted that they could not be in attendance. As we've heard some of the testimony thus far, sometimes the numbers don't always seem consistent, and that's why I've tried to document everything I'm doing here today. For instance, we've heard that it was going to be $1 billion over 10 years. Sometimes it would be $2 to3 billion over 10 years. Some say there would be no new internet gamblers. Another testified that it might increase 2 or 3 times in 2 years. It was stated that there would be a way to eliminate all illegal gambling. And then in your discussion, it turns out that that may not be possible because of rules of internet law and such like this. There's concern and address that They would be able to identify the players and make sure that no youth played, and it would all be properly geolocated. And I have a letter from the FBI that disputes some of that technology. So as we look at the socioeconomic factors, I want to look at both as was identified by Terry Sucanali of the Office of Problem Gambling, the problem in pathological gambler and some of the ramifications of their pathology problem, addiction, however phrase you might wish to use it. From the person, there is obviously the stress, depression, sometimes will lead to suicide. In the financial area, and I'll deal with this all in more detail, there's not only just the basic financial hardship and debts and asset losses, but sometimes that will lead to bankruptcies or even legal problems with theft or embezzlement. There are interpersonal aspects, and she did identify that you have to be concerned not only with the gambler, but those who are related to the gambler, either as friends, family, or business associates. Some numbers I have heard, and I don't have these, so I have to say that I cannot note the exact number. She may be able to do so, is that for every gambler, there is a direct impact of at least 7 other people. And so it's not just one gambler, it begins to grow as the impacts of these interpersonal relations occur with neglect of family and relationship breakdown. And all of this eventually will lead to an increase and a burden on public work and community services and the work and study of the individual. So these are some of the areas that I hope to address. First, as I said, when we deal with internet gambling, we have to say, is this going to be able to be monitored, regulated, and controlled the way that it needs to be to avoid the basic problems of gambling, but also the youth aspect to it? In letter from the FBI to a congressional committee in Washington, D.C., very briefly questions were asked, such as, does the technology exist that could facilitate undetectable manipulation of an online poker game? Brief answer from the FBI, yes. Could technology be used to illicitly transfer or launder money in the guise of innocent participation in an online poker game, or the undetectable theft of money from one participant in such a game by others acting in concert? Brief answer, yes. Do you believe the claims of vendors who say they have the technological solutions that would validate the age of a potential player and physical location beyond a shadow of doubt? FBI answer, no. Now, we know that the technology continues to improve. We've heard some testimony here in these past weeks. And so it's conceivable that the one fellow who said that he can eliminate 99.99% of all unlicensed sites in California, and I assume with the proper statutory regulation he could do it today and eliminate them all. But then the question was raised, is he going to be permitted to do that with the way the laws of the land are written? So this raises concerns that mean that the gambling problem that we have currently will most likely be exacerbated. I have facts to show some of that if internet gambling is legalized. Currently, according to studies in California, this one is from Gambling in the Golden State. It's also found in the Office of Problem Gambling Prevalence Survey. There's an estimated nearly 1 million, now this report is about 4 years old now, 1 million adults, costing the state of California nearly $1 billion a year. These 1 million adults who are problem or pathological gamblers. Sometimes they use the word gambling addiction, but the pathological gamblers, there's nearly 1 million, costing the state of California 3 or 4 years ago more than or nearly $1 billion. That does not include nearly 600,000 youth problem and pathological gamblers. They're not counted. So if you count the adults and the youth, as of 4 years ago, there was more than 1.5 million problem and pathological gamblers in California, and that is with a illegal internet gambling access. In the prevalence study that I quoted, the California Gambling Prevalence Survey, they identify that there is a link between internet gambling, or rather gambling problems and pathological gamblings, and accessibility. It says simply this: increased availability leads to more gambling and more problem pathological gambling. So it isn't one of these things where we somehow have hit a saturation point. The more that gambling is available and accessible, the greater the problem and pathological gambling problem in California will become. From a National Gambling Impact Study Commission report from the United States government, it says that pathological gamblers as a group are susceptible to problems with internet gambling. And they identify some of the increasing risk factors, such as accessibility, 24/7. As we would know, this internet is available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and if it were to become legal, would be in every home, office, dorm room, and currently smartphone. Number two risk factor is an increase in the high-speed instant gratification of internet games. We've already had testimony here that internet poker is played at a faster rate than the same poker game at a brick-and-mortar casino or card room. And that speed generates or becomes a risk factor in problem and pathological gambling. Finally, a concern that was raised is the high level of privacy. Evidently, the social atmosphere in a brick-and-mortar casino or card room can provide some deterrence. One can imagine that your friends are sitting there and they say, maybe you better slow down, you've lost an awful lot. But in the privacy of your home, there is no one to offer that. And though we are told that you can set limits and self-exclusionary aspects, a lot of the problem pathological gamblers choose not to self-exclude. Perhaps because one of the problems of any addiction, and problem pathological gambling included, is a level of denial that I don't have a problem. And many of them feel they are just one game away from breaking even. And that becomes feeding into the problem. Anyway, this study says that these factors may exacerbate problem and pathological gambling. Some of this work was also done, and I'll get to him later, Dr. Howard J. Schaefer from the Harvard Medical School's Division of Addiction. He is the one who expanded that list of three and included very simply this: the frequency of use, the accessibility, the duration of the action, how long can one play, the potency of the game, the route of administration, that is, what is the speed or the turnover, and then, of course, the player attributes. We know that not everyone who gambles will become a problem or pathological gambler. But there are a great many who are at risk, and the internet will exacerbate this by introducing risk factors that are not always found in other places. One of the, because Dr. Schaefer is at the Harvard Medical School, he has within his work simply this: do no harm. Policymakers and clinicians must avoid the possibility of inadvertently doing harm. And he would, I believe, include in part of that not only in the treatment aspects that have to be addressed, but also making something of this danger so accessible and in these homes. Also, I'd like to share, this is a very limited study. It's from the University of Connecticut. And they determined that unlike the general population that might have a 2 to 5% problem or pathological gambling situation, they have determined that internet gamblers rated at a 10.6 level 2, which is the problem gambler, and 15.4 at level 3. Now, in their study, they had to say they don't know, they do not say that internet gambling is causal. It could be that the internet pathological problem gambler rather seeks out the internet because of its accessibility and availability and anonymity. However, we do need to be aware that if we legalize internet gambling, we should expect not only an increase in the normal population of problem pathological gamblers, but we may see an accelerated rate on the internet because of these risk factors, but also because of that availability. Also, from the Arizona Office of Problem Gambling, they say that internet gambling has shown itself to be just as addictive, if not more so. And their concern, as they have studied, though it is illegal also in Arizona, it is easy for young people to develop gambling problems through online gambling because it is difficult, I would say impossible, for parents to know what their children are doing online all the time. When this now goes to the smartphones, where the parents send their children off to the park to play baseball, they may have absolutely no idea what their children are accessing in that situation. Along the lines of the internet, this is a statement again from the National Council on Problem Gambling, her, I guess, counterpart at the federal level. They had a similar experience. In their review of just a very brief period of time, 1,300 calls for immediate help, 8% reported that their problem was primarily internet gambling. That was their choice. I think you had 2.5% is all?
2.7.
So 2.7. So it could be the difference in, I don't know how that's accomplished, but at the federal level, at the national level, their studies show that 8% are calling in that their primary problem is at the internet, and this is as an illegal operation. It's possible that some people may be concerned about calling for fear that they don't understand the law and feel that they might be subject to some legal responsibility. The same organization, a recent study by the Annenberg Foundation found that 600,000 youth reported gambling on the internet on a weekly basis. Now, again, that's national. But if the youth are able to do that now, when it becomes legal, and some of the perhaps concern of being illegal is not there, it's conceivable that the legal use will go up, but also the illegal use by youth will go up, especially if we cannot absolutely be certain that we are eliminating all unlicensed site. There are a couple surveys I want to at least draw to your attention. These concern the general population in terms of support and voting, probably because there's a basic concern about gambling in our state, which is why we have a Gambling Control Commission, which is why all of these are very strictly regulated. In California, 61 to 36% of California voters reject the idea of legalizing internet poker in California. This was a survey that was done at the end of 2010, I believe. On the national level, there's a survey that was done, and 67% oppose changing the law to permit people to place bets over the internet. I would contend that the people of California have a pretty good sense of the dangers of internet gambling in their homes and do not want it. And I would hope that as we better understand some of the socio and political impacts, that might be the decision that is finally reached here in the legislature as well. There are, in the socio and political worlds...
Reverend, let me get you to...
Wrap it up?
Yeah, a little bit. I want to...
Okay.
I wasn't trying to rush you, but...
Okay, I'll leave off one page.
Okay.
I will look real quickly now at some of the economic factors. Most of the time, we look at gambling as a revenue stream, and yet there are a number of studies. Here's a study by a John Warren Kent and Ann Bryn. Basically, gambling is economically and politically destabilizing. As quantified by reports, the socioeconomic cost of legalized gambling far outweigh any possible benefits that it could bring to any economy. Addictions to gambling not only weaken society, but impose a burden on both the gamblers and the non-gamblers alike in the forms of increased taxes based on social costs running into the billions of dollars. A study from the Personal Banking Crisis Group, according to their study, it was established that a significant relationship exists between legalizing gambling and causing new bankruptcies. As I said, many governments choose to legalize gambling with the promise of new jobs and new revenue. In order to have new jobs, according to the economic studies, you need three things. You need to attract buyers or players from outside the area, which enlarges the local economy. You need to have revenue that's generated from outside the host area. And you need to have employees living in the host area. Internet gambling, because it's going to be locked intrastate, will not bring any new gamblers basically into the state of California. It also will not bring any money in from outside California because those people can't play. And depending on the business model that is adopted, there may be money leaving the state of California in terms of paying the operators or managers, however that's going to finally be determined. So I raise that as a concern that the promise of new jobs doesn't meet any of the three criteria that, according to economists, are necessary to create new job and new economic growth. Basically, gambling is simply a transfer of money from one local pocket to another, from one sector to another, and does not lead to a net increase. There is a study that shows that for every $1 that is collected in tax revenue by the government agency, $3 are spent to deal with the problems it's creating. And so I'd even say in terms of the promise of tax revenue, at a loss of $3 for one, most of us could not run a business if every dollar we made, we lost $3. And I would contend that gambling, therefore, is the kind of business industry the state cannot afford to have. Finally, a couple real quick recommendations. This is a policy recommendation that because of the inherent addictive nature of gambling, which makes it an untenable burden on society and it's a no-win situation, the recommendation is that, that there be a prohibition on expanding gambling, and that states not, this is again from the National Gambling Impact Study Commission, and that states not permit the expansion of gambling into homes through technology. I would be glad to answer any questions. I've got lots of documentation. Thank you, sir.
Okay, don't leave.
Oh, I'm not going there.
Okay, and Mr. Fred Jones from the Coalition Against Gambling Expansion. And
Thank you, Chairman, Senator
did you
Padilla.
get hit in the head? What did you do?
You should see the other guy.
Okay, okay.
I was playing basketball last night, and head to head, and I got the worst of it. Thanks for your concern. I'm going to be really short, just kind of playing cleanup here. As an attorney, but also someone that's been in the policy setting arena for nearly 20 years here in the building, I see a lot more questions than answers about interstate gambling, internet gambling, and intrastate gambling in particular online, and a lot of concerns. And I appreciate Senator, you calling this meeting because all the other meetings to date have been on the positive side of the ledger. You know, there's some disputes about how far we're going to go, what games are going to be allowed, who's going to be allowed to have licenses and hubs. But for the most part, everyone to date has embraced the idea. And I think you're seeing a little bit of concern and pause in today's panel, so I'm grateful that you convened this meeting. One of the concerns we have is if all of us can concede the fact that these online games are illegal, if they're using credit cards at least, then why should we rush to create a new legal schema and allow the color of law to sanction that activity until we first get our house in order? Shouldn't we first enforce law now? Now, I understand the state of Washington actually passed a law to clarify that. I don't think we need that. We can enforce law now. We can ask the federal government to assist. And so why would we, and make no mistake about it, this is the most dramatic expansion of gambling in not only our state's history, but it represents the largest single step in expanding gambling nationwide, given the size of our state. So this is a radical expansion of gambling. And so right now it's the wild, wild west. I understand the intent behind your measure and behind Senator Correa's bill is to bring some regulation to it. But boy, for those of us that are already concerned about gambling, we would certainly like to see we get our enforcement and regulatory house in order under current law before we decide to go down this primrose path, which is, again, the most radical expansion we've ever seen in one fair swoop. I too watched every hearing. I appreciate many of the testimony. I was particularly struck by the Canadian, Mr. Roger Horbay with Black Edge, and he said that in studying what happened in Europe, that you can expect a 3 to 4 time expansion of the number of online gamblers once a state government sanctions this. However, he quickly added, 2 of every 3 new players will probably go off and play the illegal hubs because they could probably operate at a cheaper rate because they won't be under the regulatory schema that you try to set up. So we're going to get all of the added socioeconomic costs of trebling the number of online players, but not all of the revenues, because possibly 2 out of 3 or maybe even more won't be playing within the legal schema that you set up. I'm not sure that's a good economic trade-off. And, you know, I'm not here obviously representing casino interests, but I think there's going to be a clear negative impact on brick and mortar establishments. And let's realize, to have a brick and mortar establishment license here in California, you've got a lot of employees that are all California citizens in California communities. When you're in the wild, wild west of the World Wide Web, the employees that set those hubs up and enforce the laws and so forth could be in Bangladesh, as far as we know. So while we don't appreciate the economic trade-off of gambling in general, we think it's at best just a transfer of wealth. We certainly see that at least brick and mortar facilities have real employees that are real California citizens, and there is at least an indirect contribution to the economy as a result. No guarantee that that will happen necessarily with online gambling, at least with a lot of the employees that help run it, despite the partnerships here in California. And for that reason, a lot of other reasons, the financial, somewhat pie-in-the-sky industry commission studies that have been done really overlook some of these things. They certainly don't look at the negatives. What are the socioeconomic costs? They're just looking at what are the potential revenues. There are costs, but even in the revenue side of the ledger, there's leakage. Just on the legal technical side of the concerns, does the state government, and as a former UNC chair, you brought up some very good points. Do our state governments have the authority to tell the telecommunications media and infrastructure what to do and how to do it, since they cross state lines and so forth? There's questions like that certainly need to be answered. Again, why we suggest let's go ahead and start enforcing law now, and let's see how far we can go before we radically expand gambling and sanction it with the color of law. Should we wait for Congress to clarify the laws? That's a question that maybe some of us need to consider. And we're obviously concerned how California regulators can ensure that all games are intrastate. They don't call it the World Wide Web for nothing. So, in conclusion, we're worried about a Pandora's box that we might be unintentionally opening. The promises that I can glean from the hearings and from the backers and from, I think, the very pie-in-the-sky intent language in both bills, which I don't think are justifiable. As best as I can glean from all that, there's really only 3 advantages to legalizing online gambling in California. More revenues for state coffers, job creation, and better regulation and protection for players. Now, I might be missing something. I'm certainly open to hearing if there's another thing on that list. But I think all of the unintended consequences, both potential and very real, I think far outweigh any of those 3. And I think all 3 of those are questionable. The more revenues, yes, you may be stealing from Peter, but we got to pay Paul. So what are the costs for every dollar wagered? If they are more than $1, then we're in a Ponzi scheme. And so you don't just deal with gambling. You guys are in control of our state budget. So you're going to have to deal with the social services that come, the impacts on our social services that come, especially among the problem and pathological citizens in our community. The whole nature of the internet is disconcerting, the idea of regulating it. Look at the recent case that we saw with a local card club and some of the issues that are going on right now in real time. If our regulatory enforcement agencies are having a hard time regulating brick and mortar establishments, are we comfortable with them being able to deal with the World Wide Web, cyber world? I'm not sure. And those are serious concerns. And again, I just want to stress that on the economic side of things, the rosy revenue predictions that I've seen from industry commission studies don't even touch the negative side of the ledger. And therefore, I'm grateful for the opportunity you've given us today to at least touch upon some of those. Thank you.
Thank you all very much. Questions from the panel? I mean, a question for the gambling control, the problem gambling office. Does everybody contribute to your office? Or is it, obviously, everyone can't be mandated. Do the compacted tribes and others who don't have, do they contribute or?
So you're talking about our funding?
Yes.
The majority of our funding comes from the Indian Gaming Special Distribution Fund.
Okay.
And then a law not long ago passed for the card rooms to pay a specific $100 per authorized table fee to the Gambling Addiction Program Fund. It brings in somewhere around $175,000 a year, and then we have an allocation from that. And we have an interagency agreement with the California State Lottery to provide, this year was $120,000, but the $8.4 million comes from Indian Gaming Special Distribution Fund.
Okay. You know, there are a couple of things I would raise. In California, currently, the credit card use notwithstanding, it's actually not, it's not illegal to gamble unless we declare it so. I mean, we have advanced deposit wagering, which is online, which is authorized. So it's not clear that it's illegal unless we take the step that the state of Washington did and affirmatively make it illegal to gamble. I think, I'm not sure, I mean, in a pure economic model, I would agree that you want to bring in new cash to create a new job, because, I mean, at a certain level, all that we do is transferring money, whether or not it's a football team or going to see a movie. I mean, ultimately, if I go to the Century cinemas down the street, I mean, if I'm in Sacramento, I was either going to spend the money there or I was going to spend it someplace else. Entertainment dollars effectively are just that. They're dollars that we spend. I mean, it's not clear that that money was going to go to church, although it could have. It's not clear that it might have bought food, although it could have. I mean, the idea for much of this is that it was going to be discretionary income. And I agree that if at the point that it becomes, your child support check or your rental check, then that could become an issue. I think, when I listened to the description of the 3 to 4 time expansion, part of what I was hearing was that you actually were getting real numbers. I mean, we've heard discussions about the current California online play that range between 200,000 people and 1 million people. I mean, I think what I understood the gentleman, the way I took his comment from Canada, is that you actually end up with real numbers, so that you have X number of players that you've gotten. There is a poker player alliance that was able to say that they had this number of members who were from California, but again, not all the people in California who played joined the alliance. So again, all we have are estimates as to the play. On the issue of the offshore sites, a couple of things that, again, you have no guarantee, but in my own investigations, most of the people who operate the current offshore sites function in a place where they have a regulatory structure. So whether or not it's Aruba or Antigua or the Isle of Man, the government that I checked with in particular was that of France. And when the French government passed their regulation, the French government went to the governments of those offshore sites and prevailed upon them to have the sites withdraw their French operations. Now, what's different than what we propose is that the French also allowed them to establish sites inside of France. So they were given an opportunity to come in and play. So it lessened the need for them to try to do it through the back door, because the French also made it illegal to play on a site other than the one that the government had sanctioned. Much of what we do in law operates under the theory that most people want to obey the law. If you said to me how many people are driving without a driver's license, clearly there's some who are doing that. When they have the checkpoints, they catch people. But the vast majority of people who drive have a license. And the vast majority have registration on their cars. Clearly there will be people who will play illegally. Should we make it illegal, which both proposals would tend to do? And we would certainly ask Justice to go to the countries where people are playing. I agree. Is there anything that is totally foolproof? If people can break into the computers at the Defense Department, then the chances are that they'll be able to figure out how to get around the firewalls that we put up for this kind of gaming. But the reality is that that's a small fraction of the people who are going to be so intent on trying to play that they're going to go through that big hurdle. I think that there'd be more people who would do it for the fun of seeing if they could do it than people who are actually intent on playing. I think, the other elements, I think you're right. We could go around. I know, Reverend, you said that there's $1 billion cost for the 1 million people in California. What do we define that cost, if you would, a little?
Okay, those are according to the, and again, comes from the Gambling in the Golden State. Those are.
What is that? I'm sorry.
What is that?
Oh, yeah,
It was published by the State Research Library. I didn't bring the book.
It's the California State Library's Research Bureau.
Okay.
Then Attorney General Bill Lockyer requested the study, and they spent 18 months putting together.
Okay.
It was released in 2000.
Okay, no, thank you. I hadn't heard of it.
Okay,
Right.
and that's why, so the numbers are probably up by now. 2006 is when it was released, yeah. Anyway, that relates to welfare, unemployment, crime, and bankruptcies primarily, just as the hard numbers. And that, for instance, one of the numbers that they've tried to look at is there are a certain number of people who are in prison and are there not because of drug inducements, but because of gambling inducements. You know, they needed money and gambled or broke in or something. So it's a contributing cause. They take the number, they multiply, and they come up with these huge numbers. They look at the people, as I said, who are in bankruptcy situations, which is a cost to the society, and then attribute a certain, not all of it is causal, but some of it is, contribute that. So these numbers are in those general areas. There's also an increase, because there's an increase with the gambling of crime, welfare, unemployment, homelessness, and bankruptcies, as well as suicide. But when they get to costs that are not monetary, they don't know how to evaluate those, so they really don't. Monetary, like for instance, it might lead to a divorce. They don't calculate money for the divorce, but they might calculate it for children who end up then on some sort of a support.
The only concern I would have with that is I mean, at some level, we allow people in society to do things that they enjoy, and what we found is those things that we try to stop people from doing, I mean, they do anyway. I mean, we all know that having sex in prison is illegal. That ain't stopped it.
I wasn't aware of that when I was incarcerated.
See, there you go. And I'm sure the guy who you were playing with didn't care either. So but the
conjugal visits, for the record.
The concern, though, is that we could begin looking at a number of things. We know that 2.7% of the people who currently call Ms. Canale's site said that their gaming is online. The federal thing, I think you cited, Rem Butler, was that they were showing it at 8%.
Yes.
So if it's already appearing at measurable levels, then the question becomes, that means that the carnage that you're describing is already taking place. It's not, and if we attempted to stop it, I'm not sure that would alter or increase the carnage. I mean, the discussion, again, when people say, well, when you made it illegal, that more, I'm not sure how many people would play. Again, I grew up in South LA, but I used to spend my summers in Detroit with my uncle, who was a numbers banker. Everybody in Detroit played numbers right up until the time that the lottery came and put the numbers people out of business. But if you were in Chicago, Detroit, Harlem, everybody played the numbers. I mean, there were ladies who were on their way to church and would drop off their numbers bank on the way to church. It had become a way of life. Were there people who overplayed? I'm sure there were, but I mean, we have a number of things that are vices. I'll bet that there's a percentage of people who get killed in traffic accidents who were drinking beer or another alcohol.
Oh, yeah.
I'm certain that I could look at the number of obese kids and trace it back to McDonald's. At some point, I'm not sure where we go with our ability to inhibit behavior that people say that they enjoy. I mean, my daughter is a Disneyland addict. When she comes home, she does both parks. She's figured out mechanisms to go to California Adventure and hang out and then come back in time to get her place in line. I mean, people have things that they do that are entertaining, and there will always be people who will overdo it, and I mean that's a risk that you take. But I think that most of the people who go to Vegas find it entertaining. Do some people get in over their heads? They do. If we stopped it, would we prevent it? I'm not sure that we would. Every experience that this country has had in trying to prohibit things that people wanted to do, we came up short. I mean, when we prohibited gambling, it exploded in an underground format. We prohibited alcohol. We created a whole underground market. I mean, the Kennedy family got rich on prohibition. The Bronfman family got rich on prohibition. We've not been particularly successful. I mean, I got people in my neighborhood who have gotten wealthy selling cocaine and marijuana. I'm just saying our ability to prohibit people from doing things has not been particularly successful. So again, I agree that there is the potential for carnage, but I submit that it's happening anyway, and even if I didn't end up collecting back all the money, if I get back half my cost, then, as we would say in my neighborhood, Ann is better than Nan. Right now, I ain't getting nothing. And if I was able to get back 30%, that's 30% more than I had. So I'm sensitive because I agree. If we certainly expand the ability to play, our information on, and I'll shut up my soliloquy, our information on the brick and mortar versus the other was based largely on what we see in current experience. The guy who's currently playing online has the opportunity to go to a brick and mortar facility, and for the most part, it seems to be a different human being. There is some crossover, but the crossover thus far doesn't seem to be quite the same in terms of brick and mortar versus the online player. He seems to be much of a different animal is what we're seeing. Some of this we won't know until you play. I mean, I agree with you, Fred, that, I mean, we will look and some of this will go like, oh my goodness, I didn't know. I mean, because you can't know and anticipate, every single eventuality, but it's going to be something that evolves or not. I mean, we could simply say, let's try to make it illegal and see if we can prevent people from playing. I'm not sure how much success we would have at that. I think the state of Washington has had some. I mean, and finally, and I'll go back to you guys, all the things that we would do with respect to trying to identify the user in California, are those things absolutely foolproof? Probably not. I mean, could someone jury rig a system so that they were really in Idaho and they were playing in California? See, the reason I'm not as worried about that is that if that guy really, really wanted to go through that much trouble, he'd just play on the Isle of Man site. I mean, why would he go through all the trouble to get into the California game when he could do the Isle of Man game, and they don't care where he lives? So why go through a whole effort to get into this game when you can go and do it in that game and they don't care where you live? They're not checking your residency. They're not checking all those things. So I'm not worried about the guy from Idaho or from Connecticut jumping into the California game, because if he's a gamer already, then he's already playing and he's got access to play where he is. That's...
Can I make if I can just make one note about the national helpline statistic. All calls from California area code that go to that national helpline are forwarded to the California helpline. So their statistic doesn't represent callers from California. Our 2.7% would represent all the calls. Even if they go to the national helpline, they're forwarded to the 1-800-GAMBLER helpline. So just a note on that.
Okay. A couple things. I do concur that gambling, you were talking about that discretionary dollar, that displaced dollars, it might be considered. And so if someone has that $10 bill, do they gamble it, or do they go and purchase an ice cream cone or entertain themselves by going to a movie, what they may choose to do? That may be true in a very factual sense. However, those other forms of entertainment do not have the same ramifications or consequences. You don't have, for instance, the same sort of problem in pathological moviegoer. You don't have the same percentage numbers. You don't have the same consequences to the society as a whole. And gambling is one of the very few, quote-unquote, entertainments that has, by studies, an identifiable suicide rate. Gambling is not entertainment. It may be taking the entertainment dollar. There may be some people who view it as a pastime, but it has some very dangerous consequences for a number of people. And the fact that we may choose to legalize it, internet gambling, your argument is that, well, the people are already there. Obviously, the fact that they're calling these hotlines show that the problem exists. But the studies also show that if you legalize it, that number will increase.
But if you took that notion, I mean, wine drinking to an alcoholic is not enjoyment. But if you're not an alcoholic and you enjoy a glass of wine, I mean, I'm not sure that I would make the same analogy. I mean, there are people who I know. I mean, I have played. I don't know how to play poker, but I did get some tuition at the school of Mr. Padilla, and my tuition is suspended at the time being. But I was actually beginning to learn the game. But between he and Mr. Benoit, they were training me in the game. But I mean, I actually found playing the game entertaining. I mean, I know people who, I mean, I've gone to card clubs, and there are people who create a whole social fabric at a card club. They play with the same people, they meet, they enjoy the camaraderie that occurs there. I mean, I got a group of women who live in my district who every quarter rent a bus and drive to an Indian casino. That's a kick for them. I mean, and they go every 3 months because they say that's all that they can afford. So they get a nice bus. Now again, this is kind of the South Central way that we roll, but they fry chicken and they get some wine, and so on the trip back and forth, they have a real good time, and they go and they will sit with a cup like this full of quarters at a slot machine until times get better, and they get a kick. I mean, that's enjoyable to them. And on the way back, the people who won usually end up having to buy the food for the return. I mean, there's a whole social structure, and they get a kick out of that. Now, how many of them are problem people? I wouldn't be able to say. Are there no problem people on the bus? I couldn't say that either. But I'd be a little hesitant to say that I'm going to say, y'all can't go on the bus to San Manuel anymore because it's bad for you.
Right. And there are those individuals that you've described. And the majority of them are as you described. But again, this is from the National Gambling Impact Study Commission. And they write, it's page 259 when you want to read it later on, the enormous profit margins inherent in legalized gambling activities can be attributable to gambling's addictive character. And further, a disproportionate percentage of the gambling industry revenue comes from pathological and problem gamblers. Somewhere, I don't say that everybody who gambles is going to, lose their house. But it is an industry that inherently exploits those who will. And somewhere in this mix, we might have to ask ourselves the question, we may not be able to protect everyone from themselves, but can we protect someone from themselves by having an illegal aspect to it? The state has that general sense of providing for the good and welfare of the citizens. And is internet gambling going to do that? One final thing, and then we let...
No, that's okay.
Well, on the fact that if you legalize it, will there be an increase? And since you brought up alcohol as one example, the studies of the minimum legal drinking age, and there's some fantastic studies on this, where they have looked at a study where what is the drinking number at age 20 versus 21? Are people really waiting until they are 21? Not everyone does, but there is a percentage that do. And the people who are at age 20, fewer of them drink than drink at 21, and they drink less than they drink at 21. So even though not everybody is going to obey the legal limit, that legal limit is counting for something. And my sense is there may be some people who are not playing on the internet right now because of the federal rules about credit cards and such. They think that it's not and we'll let Fred address this as well, but wholly legal operation. If that becomes legal and has the stamp, the color of law, the stamp of approval by the state of California, it's like lowering the legal drinking age. Suddenly, something that was not legal is legal, and the people who are not engaging will engage. And a larger percent of them will be problem and pathological gamblers by the studies than the ones who, when they turn 21, go to the brick and mortar casinos. And again, that's because of the accessibility, the speed of play, the privacy elements. And I'll tell you, and especially in a community property state, your spouse comes home from a bad day at work, wants to lose themselves on the internet, and you wake up the next day and everything's gone. And you're gone too, but you had no input into that. The state of California now has the responsibility of responding to that. And just, the financial aspects are bad enough, but when you break it down to individuals, the individual consequences to the person and the family, that's the one that, according to the commercial, that's what's priceless. That's what you can't restore. So, but
No, you're right. No,
it's almost Sunday,
That's right. Well, it is Sunday someplace, I imagine. Go ahead, Fred.
Thank you. There may be a cultural or ideological divide. We can't cross that bridge necessarily.
You don't do fried chicken in a paper bag?
Vis-a-vis gambling, Senator. My family loves fried chicken. Not everyone were doing the numbers. When the lottery came along, a lot of people started playing the numbers. Because when the state sanctions an activity, you got marketing teams and advertisement. All these things become legal ways of getting and driving people to the numbers games. So when the color of law endorses any activity, there's lots of smarter people than I who are paid lots of money to go out and market those programs. With interstate gambling in particular, how much will the regulated licensed hubs benefit from that, and how much will the illegal operators who are currently operating illegally benefit from that? Those are questions that are going to be hard to answer. But there will be an expansion of people gambling. There's a lot of studies on what's called convenience gambling. Especially started coming out after tribal casinos started expanding in the 90s. And they saw a lot of problems spike when casinos were built in people's backyards. A lot of people that did not know they had dispositions for pathology suddenly had the opportunity and the access. Well, you're flirting with the most accessible form of gambling ever. It's in your back pocket, or maybe it's in your suit pocket if you've got a smartphone. There'll be plenty of free apps that you can download, and you can have a casino in your pocket and a vacuum sucking your money. And if you've got dispositions that lead to problem or pathology, That money's gone. So access is a big issue, and convenience gambling raises all sorts of concerns. To your issue about people who can handle their wine, I'd say it's not a fair comparison. It's more like people who buy fortified wine. And you're going to get to those people a lot quicker when you have them on their smartphones gambling.
But fortified wine is largely a function of how much money you have. I mean, they sell more fortified wine on Central than they do on La Cienega. I mean, it's a function of what you can afford. I mean, they sell more lobster in Manhattan Beach than they do in Compton. It's not that the people in Compton don't like lobster, but ground beef is more in line with your pocketbook.
Maybe so. My point, though, is if you're looking for a fix from alcohol, you're going to go for fortified before you go for normal wine. If you got dispositions for problem or pathological gambling, right, you're going to go for the easiest and the most accessible and private form of gambling, and that's certainly going to be online gambling. So I just want to stress, we're at a serious crossroads here. Are we going to, as the largest state in the Union, the most prosperous nation in the world, going to endorse the most accessible form of gambling possible?
But let me make another point, though. I mean, and rescue me here. If I'm a pathological player and I'm playing online, a couple of things have to occur for me to play online. One of them is that I have to maintain my internet service, whether it's a smartphone or whatever it is that I'm doing. I also have to maintain a certain amount of money in the cage. Otherwise, I'm kind of out of the game. If I'm a player and I'm just a straight up addict and I got to have it, I'd actually be better off at the brick and mortar place, because I could go and take $30, not have an internet service, and walk in and sit down and play, which I would not be able to do in the online system, because all the things that you described. If I'm going to lose my house, then chances are I ain't paying the electric bill, and chances are I ain't paying the internet service, so that what becomes the easier thing for me to do would be to get to a brick and mortar facility and play, because I don't have all of the other requirements in order to play. Even though there is a level of anonymity, I agree, but I can walk into the Hollywood Park Casino, and if there's a chair, I can sit down and start playing, and as long as I meet the table stakes, irrespective of where I got the money from. It is much more involved for me to do the online game, because I've got to maintain the electric bill and the cage and the other things that allow me to play.
Well, I don't know if this will be a lifeline to you, Senator, but I'll throw it out there anyway. You've heard of the term functional drunk. There are plenty of people that have pathologies that somehow maintain functionality. It doesn't mean, though, underneath they're not crumbling. And those are the people who end up costing society the most, because their wives often don't know, their kids don't know, and when they fall big, because now they've leveraged themselves well beyond their assets. The smartphones are almost ubiquitous, and they've only been around for like 2 years. I mean, we have cell phones, but I'm talking about real computers. It crosses socioeconomic boundaries, so that's not even a boundary anymore. Somehow people of very little means have an ability to take advantage of technology. And so, again, the question before this House with your bill and Senator Correa's bill is, are we prepared in a current environment that's wild, wild west to go and expand this and put your reputation, this House's reputation, on the line in sanctioning this first state in the nation? I think it's a big gamble, no pun intended. I would rather see us first get our house in order first. Let's see if we can, and let me get back to your first point that you made. I disagree with the affirmative burden that you're shifting toward you. I think the federal law was clear, and I think you do not need a law affirmatively stating that online gambling is illegal. But even if I concede that, so be it. Let's do that first. Let's study these consequences. Let's consider all the ways you can regulate it. under existing law before you go ahead and sanction this. I don't know why there's this big race. I don't know anybody that's clamoring for legal online gambling. And as you said, if people want it, they're already doing it. I think we need to take some time here and consider all the possible consequences, because there are a lot more unintended consequences that none of us have dreamt up yet.
I think let me ask if there are any questions in the audience. You know, we've got two chairs in the front. Don't leave. No, it might be a question for you. No. You.
Good afternoon, Senator,
Good to
members
see
of
you
the
again.
committee. Yes, I've spoken here before. My name is Martin Owens. I'm an attorney, and I specialize in Internet and interactive gaming law. I have other qualifications in this direction. I co-authored a book called Internet Gaming Law with Professor Nelson Rose, who's America's senior authority on gambling law. And I'm associate editor of Gaming Law Review and Economics, the National Law Review magazine on the subject. But I would put my primary qualification in this direction to the fact that I am the proud son of a thoroughbred horse trainer who has just retired after 70 years in the business. And I wasn't actually going to say anything today, but some of the things that have been said before you today, I not only question, but I positively take exception to. All my life, and I was around gambling and racing and gamblers and people who operate gambling since literally since before I could walk. I have never actually seen this boogeyman that everybody claims is out there in the bushes. The plain fact of the matter is the average race tracker is not a social menace. In fact, he does more honest work in a morning than most people do in a month. And I'm afraid a lot of what I've heard was exaggerated, taken out of context, or just plain wrong. Now, if you want to talk about threats to the social fabric and the social welfare, if you want to talk about people losing their houses and businesses and jobs, having their families broken up, then I would like to ask where all these advocates were when people were actually being skinned by dot-coms and dot-bombs and Enrons and phony baloney mortgages with hooks in them and actual toxic assets, fraudulent shares being sold on Wall Street, open organized crime. They talk about suicides and so forth. Well, you hear a lot of that. I say, name three. I will say this, too. Internet gaming, in a legalized form, offers California, by anybody's estimate, hundreds of millions of dollars of revenue and hundreds, possibly thousands of jobs. I don't hear a counteroffer from the other side. Now, there have been a great many, twistings of the facts and misrepresentations. A study. Every other word seems to be study. Or an FBI letter. Well, the FBI, I'm afraid, we know has become fairly politicized. There was even talk about money laundering. Well, the plain fact of the matter is anyone who knows anything about the Internet knows that it is less safe to try money laundering there than anywhere else in the world, because every piece of information that goes over the Internet has an address. Every single piece. So you cannot hide the money, mix it up, as they say, layer it. There's a beginning, an end, and an address for every dollar that moves over the Internet. The sad fact of the matter is, if you actually did want to try to launder money and mix it up, you'd have a better chance in a brick and mortar place, although they watch pretty closely too. The plain fact of the matter is, one of the studies that was quoted from the University of Connecticut, I had occasion to look into that myself. No other word for it, it was a farce. First of all, the average person who gambles on the internet is white male, mid-30s, with a 5 or 6 figure income, and few family responsibilities. But this so-called survey was passed out in the free clinic, the free dental clinic of the University of Connecticut. You won't find a bunch of those people around there. Approximately 2,000 of the surveys were passed out. Something like 600 came back, but for some reason the authors claimed 100% response. I don't know why. I'm afraid all that survey proves is that nobody gets big money for reporting that everything's all right. We've had a reference to the Harvard Medical School. There was an actual piece of scientific investigation, not a survey where people will only tell you what they want to tell you, not a statistical prognostication, but actual observation, empirical observation of what actual gamblers did at an online operation called BWin. And what the Harvard Medical School found was that the emergence of what is called pathological behaviors hovered at about 2%, which corresponds, by the way, with what Ms. Canale was saying, about 2.7% come her way.
Let me do this. I don't want us to start questioning, everybody else's study and statistic. We could certainly do that. I think we've clearly seen that there have been some issues that arise from the gambling that we are currently involved in. Some people overdo it. It does have the potential to cause. That's why we have the problem gambling office, and I think that that's, certainly a good investment. If I get one more email from a Jamaican prince who offers me a steak and Legos if I give him my credit card number, and I know people who've done that, and when you go to the address where that was, you don't get nothing. Your money is gone. And between the Jamaicans, the Nigerians, and the Russians, they usually steal money from the internet on steroids. I don't know that I would necessarily agree that the internet doesn't have the potential to loot money out of your wallet. And God forbid that you get one of those guys with the thing where they can pull your PIN number off your card and take the money. The internet does pose some level of risk. I think gambling as well poses a risk. I wouldn't disagree with the lady and the gentleman that even in a brick and mortar casino, it's kind of sort of designed to titillate. The way slot machines work, people spend a lot of money in designing that machine to kind of sort of bring you in. They're not, there's a method to the madness of what they do. Our question, I guess, as a policy is, if we said don't, would people stop? And I'm not sure that they would. And does the fact that we say yes take people who would not have otherwise done it and convert them? I would probably say to some degree that it probably does. Would they have gotten into something else that might have been bad? Possibly. Am I doing it because it's the job creation thing? No, I agree. With some of the economics that as you shift money around, you didn't create a new job, but entertainment and leisure time activities do have value. And, as much as I may or may not like it, I think we would be loath to try to say, because I like it, I think everybody ought to do it, or because I don't like it, I should prevent other people from doing it. I mean, there's that fine line of where we go, and that's kind of how we have to draw it. Can some young people slip by? Yeah. Will some people defeat the system and get in? Probably. Is it going to be a number significant enough to outlaw or make it a wholly unprofitable enterprise? I don't know. Do the people make money because people spend more? Yeah. Can we try to manage the game in such a way that we try to limit how much we'll let in it? I mean, those are all questions that we'll certainly deal with respect to the regulation of the game and how we go forward, and I think we'll have to take a lot of that into account.
All right, so I would just like to close real quick by saying that you're completely correct that there are problems associated with this and every other human activity, but the worst thing California could do is stick its head in the sand. Because right now, like it or not, unauthorized, unlicensed people are accessing the California market to the tune of something like $1 billion a year, and from this, California gets nothing. If you want the people to be protected, good idea. Protect them. Pass the laws. Make it attractive for people to operate legally in here, because really, it's the only chance you've got. And I'd just like to close by saying, it was just a personal thing, but I personally got fed up with hearing that threadbare old red herring about how we're a menace to society. Because when you talk about gamblers, they're not just an abstraction to me; they're my people.
Okay.
Thank you very much for hearing me out.
Okay.
Good afternoon, gentlemen.
How are you?
Thank you, Senator, for giving me this opportunity. I'm going to be very brief. I happen to be, for many reasons, a big fan of Susie, Miss Kennelly, because she does a great job with the Problem Gambling Board. I just want to say that the card club industry, along with the tribes, have been very, very supportive of the Problem Gaming Council. We have had our one member, Leo Chu, on the board for 14 years. We're paying the $100 per table, which we got passed, which we supported. This is not having, like the gentleman said, our head in the sand. When you talk about gamblers really wanting to play, the reason that they're playing now is on illegal sites. Even though they know it's illegal, they want to be playing. But my point is that same person, if we don't have an intrastate gaming law, if we don't have supervision, then you're just giving the opportunity for the sick gambler to pass his funds through illegal operations. The 18-year-old that's playing, we just had, I'll give you a slight 20-and-a-half-year-old won a tournament in Vegas, and they said, "You played so skillfully." Well, I've been playing since I'm 13. And he's been playing on the illegal sites. We have a responsibility to have a law that protects the citizens of California, earn some income for the citizens of California, and with proper legal status, such as, I know you've been discussing the Senator, we've all been thinking about what type of penalty, what type of criminal act is it going to be. You put some teeth in it so that we can actually go out and stop the kids from playing. You have an opportunity. The person that's having problems with pathological gambling, they come into our clubs, they sign, "Please bar me. I don't want to play anymore." Then 2 weeks later, they're sneaking into the club with a wig on, trying to figure out how to play. We monitor that. We protect those people. Without proper controls, you cannot protect the public. The reason you have an FDA for medicines is to protect the public. Otherwise, you'd have all sorts of illegal drugs being sold in the marketplace. This responsibility belongs to the state of California, belongs to the people that have been doing it and protecting. I continue to say that we in the industry support the Problem Gaming Council. We recognize it's there. Ideally, I've said this many times, I said it to you, Senator, if I had my way, everybody have a red light in the middle of their forehead. Not that it's Ash Wednesday, but a light that goes on that he can't play anymore because he's out of money. We don't have that luxury, but we monitor and we see what goes on. And we watch the customers when we don't let them drink. I mean, we have strict rules about alcohol so that they can't overdrink. We have limits, we have responsibilities. This is in the hands of the industry. All we ask the legislature to do is give us some more tools, and we'll do even a better job. And if that means $200 a table for a Sue's council, fine, let that be. But give us some tools to work with. So thank you very much.
All right. Thank you all for coming. As I said, we'll have a kind of a wrap-up on the 22nd. It'll be a bill hearing as well, and the bill should go fairly quickly. For all the people, again, who've come to all the hearings and participated, we appreciate the input, and I think all the panels that we had have provided something that we want to have. There will be a requirement that there's a contribution to the Problem Gaming Council. We will look at the issues for preventing youth from going online. Our experience is that the ability to protect gamblers in an online environment, at least in the initial review, is actually better than the brick and mortar site because you have more controls as you sign on. Can people defeat it? Yes, they can, and we'll have to see how all that works. But I appreciate all of the input from all the panelists, from all the people who've participated in the hearings that we've had, and I think this was like number 6. Probably a lot for one piece of information, but to your point, Fred, we believe that this was so important that it merited actually taking the hours in order to do that. So, we've tried to analyze it every way that we could. Thank you all for participating, and we're adjourned.